And back that way. Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us for our session today. My name's Dr. Bernadette Sheedy. I'm the High Ability Learning Specialist at Box Hill High School. I consider myself a passionate advocate for our high ability students and their families and our teachers. And I really feel passionate about sharing my knowledge and empowering my colleagues, so all of you. And I feel like the best PDs are the ones where you can walk away and actually have something practical to implement in the very next session. So that's certainly the approach that I've taken to planning today's lesson. And I'd like to say hello to all of our colleagues who are joining us online. Welcome. You're very welcome to contribute, and I know that our people will be watching the chat, so if you've got any questions, please let me know. So I'm going to jump straight into it because of time. I'm going to be taking the approach of looking at why is this important, so curriculum differentiation and engaging gifted and talented students using differentiation. So why is it important? How can we approach it from a broad perspective? What is the approach that I think is most user-friendly for teachers? And then I'm also going to look at what specific strategies can we be using in our classrooms. So that's the plan for today. So jumping straight into the why do we do what we do? There we go. Thank you. Okay, so a lot has already been said the last couple of days about the characteristics of high ability students. So I would just like to refer to the fact that we have had both national and state level inquiries into gifted education in Australia. And this is something that was printed in the 2012 Victorian report from that inquiry. And this is a summary of the typical characteristics of our gifted and talented students. And I really like presenting this to my colleagues because I think when we look at this table, I find myself naturally thinking about certain students that I've taught, particularly I'm currently in a school that has a SEAL program, and I'm fortunate to be working within that program. And I look at these types of qualities and I immediately have certain students who come to mind. But I think what this also demonstrates is that there are some qualities that certainly support learning. When we talk about things like having an extensive vocabulary, or, you know, if they're interested, they can have a long attention span, that sounds really positive. But at the same time, there are qualities up there that could be barriers to learning or could actually make learning quite challenging, whether it's talking about perfectionism and intensity, which our high ability students often demonstrate, the fact they tend to question authority. Maybe some of you have been in that position where your students have said, it doesn't sound quite right, and things like that. So sometimes these qualities of our high ability students support learning. Sometimes it can make it really challenging. And of course, that then translates into the classroom. So if we consider that they can be really intense and focused on particular passions, it could be very different from those of other children, particularly if we're talking about chronological aged peers. And, you know, the child might find it hard to then discuss their interest in, you know, physics, biology with other students who just want to play with Thomas the Tank Engine, okay? So there are certainly qualities here that can be positive or have negative impacts that we need to kind of think about. And so when I think about giftedness, this I think is a pretty accurate representation of, you know, what people think of stereotypically, I suppose, when it comes to what is a high ability student. You know, they think, oh, curiosity, energy, really inquisitive, that sounds fantastic. But below the surface, when you're actually working with these high ability students, we start to see what's below the waterline there. They can become very overwhelmed. They can actually become really anxious, you know, very competitive. Goodness, you return back an outcome to the students, and, you know, the first thing they do is compare it with each other. 94, 93, oh, that kind of thing. And then, of course, they want to come to you and see if they can grab those extra marks to beat their peers. So I'm sure we can all relate to experiences like that. So above the surface and below the surface. And I think when I'm talking to teachers about giftedness, sometimes thinking about the fact that studies that have actually talked about the neuroscience of the gifted brain, and the fact we are talking about a neurodivergence, really, the fact that the brain in our highly able students is working differently, which I think provides a lot of justification about why these adjustments are needed. It's not just that they're bright, it's that they literally have brains that work differently compared to their same age peers. So I think that reinforces the necessity. Not to mention the asynchronous development. So what this is basically referring to is that you might be working with a year 7 student who intellectually is currently operating at a year 9 or a year 10 level. Particularly, I find in maths and science in my school that tends to apply. But their emotional maturity, their emotional development might still be the same as that of their same age peers, or it might actually have deficiencies in that area. So that is a very complex young person if emotionally, they're quite vulnerable or actually falling behind their age peers, but intellectually, you can imagine them being, almost university ready. So this is definitely something to think about as a justification why differences are needed. And then, of course, we have our beautiful, amazing, twice exceptional group who not only have those traits of giftedness, but might have these range of difficulties, whether it's students who might, be on the spectrum, it might be students with mental health challenges. I think that's something that's often overlooked in the discussion of 2E, the fact that you could have a gifted student who is 2E because they have anxiety and depression. I'm working with an amazing young lady in year 8 who's in that scenario, and sadly, because of some of those challenges with her mental health, she misses some classes and lessons because of that. So being able to work with her to make sure she can achieve her potential is something I work really hard to do. So a number of different challenges there. And I really like this quote from Susan Weinbrenner, who talks about gifted learners are just as far removed from average as are children with learning problems. The differentiation that gifted students need is highly defensible and equitable. I refer to gifted students as students who have special needs. They are special needs students. And I think that that's important language when we're talking about this field at our schools, to really highlight to our colleagues the need to see them through that lens and to understand that they do require something different from what we might present to the mainstream. All right, so now moving on to the how. Now, there are a lot of models that you might be familiar with when it comes to planning and implementing differentiation. One that I'm not going to talk about today, but I would encourage you to have a read about and do some research about, is called the integrated curriculum model, which was created by one of the gurus in our field, and that is Joyce Van Tassel-Basker. And she works through the College of William and Mary overseas. And that particular model was designed specifically to work in gifted classrooms. I'm not going to talk about it today because I feel that in terms of practical applications, it's going to take more time than I actually have to be able to unpack it. But that is one I would recommend to you. But the one I would like to talk about today is one you're probably familiar with, and that was created by June Maker. So our content, process, product, and environment. So the areas we can make practical changes in order to make something different that works to cater for the needs of our students. So in terms of content, what do we need to modify? So it needs to be more abstract, complex, it needs to have more variety, and it needs to perhaps be organised in a different way. And also involve the study of people and methods of inquiry. So when we're talking about the study of people, for example, in year 9, we do a unit at the start of the year on autobiography and memoir and things like that. And one of the activities I give to my SEAL class is that I give them biographies of other eminent, gifted individuals. So people like Einstein, for example. particularly eminent individuals who have had to overcome significant challenges in their lives in order to be successful in their fields. And we kind of unpack the biographies. And one of the points of that is because sometimes our high ability students think that things should come easy to them. And they can get quite frustrated when they hit barriers. So being able to see, oh, you know what? Yeah, Einstein was actually, not considered very highly by his teachers when he was younger. They probably never would have imagined that he would end up doing what he did. To actually see what challenges they overcame, I think can give them a lot more confidence in terms of, okay, so maybe my 80% on the test last week wasn't too bad because I can still grow and I can change and I can learn and things like that. So that's an example of the study of people and how I applied that in my classroom. So in terms of process, so we can talk about higher order thinking, as many of our sessions here at the conference have talked about, and the use of the higher order elements of Bloom's, and open-ended thinking, as well as including things like discovery, proof and reasoning, freedom of choice. I'm really going to emphasize that during this session, and group interactions. As was said, even in the session I've just come from now and this morning, like-minded, amazing young individuals thrive when they have a chance to come together and to work together. So if we can pop them in groups with like-minded students who might not necessarily be in the same year levels, they might actually be in different year levels and working on projects, that is something that will really provide the stimulus and environment to help them thrive. So what else can we change? So we can also then look at the products. So we can modify our products, so what they're producing, to look at real-world problems, real-world audiences. Keep that one in mind. I'm going to talk about an example in that relating to that in a second. Real deadlines, evaluations and transformations, and the learning environment itself. We can think about how to modify that to maximise what we're doing. So making it very student-centred, giving them more independence, openness, acceptance, more complexity, varied grouping. So flexible groupings is important, and also high mobility. So not being stuck, for example, just sitting with the same partner for the whole term, but actually having a lot of variety in terms of matching it to what we're working on. So what I thought I might do at this point is I've given you a handout with some examples of different tasks that have been modified for high ability classes, high ability students. So rather than me just talking and pointing out, oh, this is where this applies, I'd really love for you to partner, have a partner, find a friend, and to have a look at the first couple of activities on the first few pages where I have the mainstream task as well as the differentiated task, and have a discussion about where can you actually see these different modifications in action in these examples. Okay, let's give a few minutes to kind of unpack and discuss, and then we'll come back and see what we've found. Okay, so please find a friend. Yes, please. Is there anyone who needs a copy of the handout? Yep, no worries, thanks. No worries.
Are these for the same class?
No, so this is for the SEAL class and this was for the mainstream class. So the mainstream year sevens. Yes, so it's still year 7, but this was SEAL and then that was the mainstream class. Yes.
2 people who handed it out didn't take 2 for themselves.
Oh, no problem at all. So these sheets are yours. Feel free to annotate all over them, or if there are any questions that come up, feel free to write them down. For those online, the handout is also on the CHES site. So if you go back to the page, it should be there. Yes. So if you just want to open that up and have a read and see where you can say, oh, okay, so I see where it's more abstract, or I can actually see where it's a bit more complex and things like that. Okay, we'll just take a few minutes to do that.
Like 17 and under full and high, I think you know our school. And yeah, we do sort of guys assessment, so we don't have like cuts in our, but we still have tasks and we would do them. Yeah, probably more like that for the whole cohort. But they wouldn't. Like what we were saying is that we think that these chunked instructions are probably fairly useful for mainstream students as well. But I wonder if the differentiation, like in terms of having it Gal and Ho, obviously that's what I'm assuming for at least for year 8 that we've got sort of a higher order skills involved with his work.
Yes.
Perhaps compared to the passage that they're looking at here. But we're talking about how that level of structure and chunking and scaffolding is probably useful across the board as well.
Absolutely, yes.
But yeah, we were also discussing how there's some like key differences in terms of the this other one, the context that's quite interesting for students, I imagine, and I can imagine that SEAL students they get quite excited by the sort of specific instructions in terms of like having context like that. And it becomes more real world as well, which I think is something that's been spoken about a few times over the last couple of days about having authentic tasks.
Absolutely, given that these young people are probably the ones who'll be solving our world problems when they become grown up. Yes.
Practice it in year 7, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. We might say one more minute. While we're just finishing up in the room, I'll just address a couple of things that have come up online. So Sigrid's asking about, are the instructions for mainstream with the persuasive speaking units, do all the mainstream students receive those instructions? The answer to that is yes. And then there's a reflection that it
Bernadette,
looks like...
I'm just asking, is that all they receive, like just that small little excerpt?
Oh, I see. No, they do receive other instructions, yes. So I've just focused on the, I guess, more the content, just to kind of summarize what they are speaking about there. So they do receive more scaffolding in terms of they actually get a booklet that they need to fill in to actually help them plan their responses. So yes, that's a fair question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, does anyone have any observations, any questions, queries about any of the activities that you've seen there? Yes.
Talking about, you get some kids that want to do the extension task because they find it interesting, even if they're not being selected as being high ability.
That's a fair question, and the activities I've presented are specifically for the SEAL class and then for the mainstream class. So in this case, no, the mainstream students aren't given that opportunity. But I think, you know, it's a fair question to consider, is there a way that the teachers doing the mainstream task could elevate that as well? So beyond simply doing a persuasive speech about a great location, how could that be elevated, you know, maybe in a similar way to the way the other one is presented? Yeah, fair question. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Melissa, yes, what would you like to ask?
I was just going to say it was really interesting seeing the way that those tasks were structured. You can see in the mainstream they're still quite open-ended, but they allow the student to show you how far they can go, whereas with the SEAL task, you can sort of see an assumed area of understanding, and then obviously bridging further
Mhm.
into more
Absolutely.
depth. There was more context, I thought, around it as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. And I think in terms of the persuasive speech example, you might have read about the fact that students had to refer to specific articles that they were given. So that's an example of how I've added some complexity to the content area, where I'm actually giving them reading to do that I would suggest is more suitable for, say, year 9 or 10 mainstream, and I'm actually including that as something they must be referring to. So I know that they're getting some elevated exposure in terms of the content, and then they can go off and do what all students do and just type stuff into Google and find some answers. So that was a way of ensuring they had some elevated exposure to the content that was relevant. And I was also speaking to my Ball One counterpart here about the fact that a lot of these young high ability students are likely to be the ones who are solving the world's problems when they grow up and become, you know, CEOs or politicians or whatever the case may be. So actually exposing them to real world issues like, you know, should we have nuclear power? How do we address the issue of pollution? These kinds of things is really important to have them thinking critically and thinking about the issues surrounding those kinds of topics. So I hope that you found those useful. Maybe it's generated some ideas about how you could make some modifications to tasks that you have coming up. All right, I'm going to keep going with my presentation just due to time. So in regards to other specific strategies. So this is really focusing in on the what. So what are some other strategies that we can apply in our classrooms to differentiate for high ability students? Now, if I were to talk about everyone that you see here on the screen, we'd be here till Christmas. But certainly when you access these slides, you're welcome to do some additional research beyond today to learn about this. I can confidently say I've applied 99% of what's up here. I haven't really used cubing and think dots because that's, I feel, more applicable to the maths science classroom, but I have used, I think, pretty much everything else as an English teacher. These are all really useful. But let's talk about some other examples. What can make the most difference if you've never differentiated before? I think the answer is pre-testing. Figuring out what the students know before they come in the classroom can stop them from getting bored because you're not repeating what they already know, and that's a big thing for high ability students, because what do they do when they're bored is they make their own fun. Sometimes they gravitate towards people in the room who aren't necessarily the best influences, shall we say. So we want to make sure they stay engaged. So what are some ways that we can do some quick, easy pre-tests, figure out their level of mastery? Something as simple as a KWL chart. So what do I already know about the topic is in the left-hand column, and what do I want to know is in the center. And they can fill that in at the very start of the unit or a bit beforehand. And then at the very end of the unit, they can come back and feel very accomplished when they fill in the final column that says, what have I learned about my topic? So they actually can see the richness and depth of the learning that they've done. Using technology to your advantage, certainly here you can see I've popped up a on our Teams surveys. I've just done a bit of a pre-test leading into a Year 7 unit on the film Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. So what are some key things I could ask to really hone in on key vocabulary and key knowledge? So things like, okay, what's genre? What is a hero? What types of shots can we use when making film? What are production elements and diegetic and non-diegetic sounds? And, you can get them to complete that at home or in the last 5 minutes of a lesson, or if they finished early in a previous session. I just need that completed by 2nd of December. You can read that through and think, okay, I can shorten my first and second lessons of the unit, do some curriculum compacting, get rid of what they already know, and actually build in some more depth and complexity into the unit. So they are a couple of ideas. A 5-question card is another one. I put this one together when I was going to do a presentation for the science domain at my school, so hence it's science related. So at the end of the session, again, you can just give them a little bit of time to focus in on some key questions. On a piece of card, get them to answer these key questions. And again, you're focusing in on key skills and key knowledge. And again, if they can do this pretty easily, fantastic. It's useful for identifying gaps. So let's say 95% of the class have no idea what the periodic table is. Okay, I'll keep that part of my intended lesson. But let's say all of those bottom terms for question 5, they all know what those are. Fabulous. My third lesson is now shortened by half an hour and I can figure out what else to help extend them in that session. Now, student choice. Our high ability students love to be able to choose and have agency in their learning. Not to say all our students don't, because they do, but particularly our high ability students love to have choice. One option for choice is something called a tic-tac-toe grid. Literally, I'm sure we've all played tic-tac-toe at some point in our youth. So we end up presenting them with something that looks like this, where they do fill in or they make a choice to complete 3 of the tasks, horizontally, diagonally, vertically, etc. What I love about this is that we as the teachers are still in that position where we create the options in the first place for the majority of the squares here, so we can make those tasks as complex as we know the students are ready for, and we can use their areas of interest to help build that as well. Sometimes teachers like to use the idea of the multiple intelligences framework to fill in this table with different strategies. That's just something else you could think about. And you can see in the center, of course, you've got a free choice. So students negotiating, Miss, I would love to write a love poem from Mercutio to Romeo, something like that. So it's really great to give them that kind of an option as well. This was one that I put together back when we were in the dark days of COVID and online. And hence the use of the hyperlinks that are here. So I was having to do my lessons and obviously give students the opportunity then to access things like videos, additional resources, and then instructing them how to complete the work as well. So building in that kind of technology can be really helpful. And then another type of option is looking at things from the perspective of a menu scenario. So in this case, you can see we've got different levels. So the questions or tasks at level 1 are worth 5 points each. At level 2, they're worth 8 points. So we're building in some more depth, some more challenge. And then level 3, they're worth 10 points each because they are the most challenging things on the board. And the instruction is that you need to complete at least, and I love that phrase at least because it's not putting a ceiling. You can do as many as you want. You can do all of them if you so choose, but you need to do at least 20 points worth of activities. So these different ideas about kind of more basic tasks, a bit more complexity, and then a lot more complex, I think is great in terms of options. This is also something I'd be quite confident walking into a mainstream mixed ability class and giving it to the students, because you might have students super interested in the topic who perhaps aren't the super highly able ones, but they want to push themselves because they love science. And they might decide, I'm going to do the level 3 tasks. We did have mention yesterday, and I've experienced this too, that sometimes our really high ability kids just are having an off day, and maybe they don't feel like doing the points, the ones worth the most points today. That might happen. You know, as a teacher, you can just go up and encourage, Johnny, you might be suited to the level 3 questions. But you know what, if it's just not their day, it's not their day. But you know what, on the weekend, when it is, maybe they're feeling a bit better, they might come back to that on their own and decide to have a go at the level 3 questions. So that's just another approach there.
How would you mark that?
So I would mark that as a formative task. I wouldn't be looking at it as a summative task. So I'd just be giving written feedback about the responses, was there enough depth to what they've done? We used Compass at our school, so, we might decide just to give it a, satisfactory, very good, etc. But I'd be mainly focusing on the written comments to give feedback, particularly if they've attempted the, level 2 and level 3 ones. I'd be giving feedback about, oh, you could consider X to enhance your answer. So that's how I'd be looking at that. Yep. Now, one of my personal favourites, and I'm sure many of you have experience with this, and that's visible thinking routines created by the lovely people at Harvard. Basically, it is a toolbox online. I encourage all of you to have a visit of that website if you haven't done so already. They're basically ways to model thinking. And that's what we love when it comes to helping our highly able students, modeling the types of thinking we want them to take on board. And so these different types of routines are teaching them how to do that. So when they're thinking about problems. So one of the routines I find myself saying in nearly every class, every second class, is the one on the top left. So we're having a discussion. Johnny's given me an answer, but he really hasn't explained where the answer came from. So I turn around and say, okay, what makes you say that? Okay, now he has to justify his thinking. So Glenn Pearsall refers to that one as the golden question because it is a great question. So this is one that is really great for unpacking any visual text. So teaching Year 11 VCE when we're looking at argument analysis and helping students to talk about photographs or cartoons as part of that, I would use this routine to get them thinking about the images. So see, think, wonder. It's as simple as, all right, literally, denotatively, what do you see? I see a car, I see people in black hoodies, I see them carrying machetes and tires. Okay. What do you think is going on? Okay, well, they're running away from the car. The driver in the yellow helmet looks pretty freaked out, so I don't think he was expecting that. So I think there's some kind of maybe crime going on. Okay. And then what does it make you wonder? So link into the bigger ideas, the bigger wondering. So, why would someone decide to steal an F1 tire off a car? Why would a society be in a position where, people are doing this and I'm not seeing any police there? Why are there no police in this image? So see, think, wonder is great to just generate those initial questions. And then, of course, we would come back to the written text and make connections to the written text, which is part of what we do in that particular unit. So see, think, wonder, fantastic. But I can imagine if you had an image in science or an image in a health textbook or something like that, that you could use this routine with that as well. And these are a couple of other ones that I really recommend. Particularly, I like connect, extend and challenge, again, for our high ability students to consider, okay, so we've just done a lesson all about cells. So how does it connect to what you already knew? Okay, I knew this was the structure, fair. But what new ideas did you get that maybe broadened your thinking or helped you extend it in a different way? Okay, what exactly have I learned? And then what challenges or puzzles you? So what are the questions emerging for you from this learning? So questioning their learning, really exercising that critical thinking. I love that routine. Now, the one on the bottom left is a routine called colour, symbol and image. And the way that I use this routine as an English teacher is that we would read a text, character-based text, and I would then ask students, rather than to just write me another character profile, I might get them to complete something that looks like this. So using symbolism, what colours do you think represents this character? And they draw that, as you can see above the line there in the square. And our highly able kids tend to not be satisfied with just one colour. They tend to really critically think, well, at the start of the novel, they were like this, and then this happened, so maybe it's a different colour. And then, at the end, they were like this. So you can see that in this example where you've got the multiple layers of colours and, of course, the justification for that underneath. What is a symbol that represents this character? Are they a very compassionate person? Therefore, a heart might be appropriate. And then what is an image? So if you think of this character in the book, what is the image that is kind of stuck in your mind? What is that key moment? So they draw that and then they write about it as well. So you can see how those higher level thinking skills are really needed to complete this kind of a task. And again, that could be applied to any text that the students are doing. And that is another example. Okay, the next one is specifically a writing activity, but I think you could apply it outside of English, and I'll explain why in just a second. So, perspectives. Coming from Amy's amazing depth and complexity presentation that was, talked about the importance of perspectives, I think is quite nice leading into this. Because being able to take on different perspectives, understand what people around the world are experiencing, feeling, thinking, again, is something that our highly able students really need to do. So in this case, they adopt the role of a specific writer. They have to write to a specific audience using a specific format, and they are given a topic to write about. So for example, here we've got Percy Jackson. So let's imagine that you're Percy Jackson writing to Poseidon, who happens to be his daddy, that comes out in the story. You're writing a letter and talking to him about learning to use their powers. Okay. I wrote this healthy eating raft when I was doing a presentation to our PE staff recently. So imagine you're a registered dietitian writing to high school students and you're doing a presentation about the importance of a balanced diet. And then there's a lot of other options there too. So I really like the fact, again, as the teachers, we could make these as complex as needed. We could present them to a mixed ability class and have some more complex options on the table. You know, and you could make it more complex by varying the format. Maybe year sevens aren't that confident writing speeches, but you could have a speech as a format there. So different elements there that we could play with in terms of differentiation. And this is not one that I created, but again, this does demonstrate how you could possibly apply it to different ones, different subjects. So the maths one, imagine you're a fraction, you're writing to some whole numbers, and it's a petition to be considered a part of the family. Very outside the square, but we are talking about highly able students. Okay. So I would also like to talk about the idea of doing tiered assessment tasks. And what I like about tiered assessment is that everyone in the room is working towards the same outcome, but we're just using different pathways to get there. And those pathways are determined based on your readiness and the skills and knowledge you already have. So for example, here's our learning outcome: to respond to this beautiful visual text by composing a simple text. And our novices in the room, okay, they're going to look at this picture and list as many words as possible about what they see. It can be, you know, nouns, colours, etc. So coming up with this vocabulary list, which is, you know, producing a response to a visual text, isn't it? So it's achieving the outcome. But maybe for our advanced writers, they can actually write a short story describing what's happening in the picture. And maybe you could give them some sentence starters. You could make suggestions about, all right, what if you're, you know, one of the people wading around in the water there, and the short story is from your point of view? Or what if you're someone selling ice cream, you know, out on, you know, on the water's edge? You know, what would your story be about? And again, it's achieving the same outcome. It's just different pathways to get there. So I really like the idea of tiered assessment, tiered activities that gets us all where we need to go, but at the right level of complexity and pace to meet those students' needs, which of course is what this is all about. And some final hints just to finish up our session for today. If differentiation is not something that you've done a lot of yet, my advice is to start small. And again, coming back to June Maker, where she says we can make differences in our content, our process, our product, or our learning environment, we can choose one of those areas as our starting point. Maybe this term we've got an assessment coming up, and maybe for our high ability students, we're going to source some more complex texts, like I did with the persuasive writing outcome, for example, and those are going to be readings the students need to do, the highly able students need to do to really enhance their understanding. That could be one option. Or maybe it's going to be more about students having more options and agency and choice through using things like those tic-tac-toe grids or those different menus and things like that. So pick something that you would like to start with and go from there. And lastly, don't be worried about giving your students responsibility for their learning, because I think highly able students really appreciate that, and they love to be you know, self-sufficient when they're working on a task they're interested in. So I think particularly teachers who come to work with highly able students for the first time can find that a bit hard to kind of actually step back and realize, okay, I'm not the sage on the stage, I'm the guide on the side. That's what you become when you're working with highly able students. And that can be difficult for teachers who are very used to being the sage on the stage. So I'll just finish with this quote here that if we don't help our gifted children reach their potential, it really is I think, a societal tragedy. You know, imagine the loss of the sonata unwritten, you know, the absence of a political insight. These gifted students are a substantial part of the difference between what we are and what we could be as a society. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you.